Welcome back to today's lesson for the Art and Science of Computer Technology. Today's lesson will be Python functions. What are functions? Functions are a block of code that runs when and only when it is called. Can be passed data, known as parameters, which can be worked with inside the function, similar to math where f of 10 could equal 100 if anything put into f gets multiplied by 10. Can return data as a result. Return values. Functions without a return statement return none. So does falling off the end of the function. So if you happen to reach the end of the function after you call it without reaching a return statement, it will return none by default. Returned values from functions can be assigned to variables such as x receives whatever f of 10 returns. So a quick example here for how you would declare it would be define, return double, here's the parameter for x, 2 colons, and return x times 2. So anything that we pass in for x would get returned times 2. Built-in functions, print stuff, we've been seeing this in all the other lessons. Int string converts or casts one type to another, such as string 10 returns integer 10, or turns integer 10 into string 10. Absolute, ABS, returns the absolute value of numbers, so negative 98 would return 98. Dir returns a list of names in the current local scope. And we'll go over all these and others in a future lesson on built-in functions, probably. Defining your own functions. Keyword def introduces function definitions, such as def my function, here's the opening, closing parentheses, colon. So print, this is the first statement in this function, and then here's just a comment that says note the indentation. So the indentation is going to determine where one code block begins and one ends. And you'll see the same thing with for loops and while statements and all that kind of stuff. Alright, doc strings. String as the first statement of a function body that can be used for documentation purposes. First line should be a brief summary, followed by a blank line and a more detailed description. Tools can use doc strings to automatically generate documentation or let users interactively browse through the code. Good practice to include doc strings. General function notes. Arguments passed using call by value. Methods are simply functions of objects. So the format would be object.method. Method is again just a function that happens to be part of an object. So here's the example, redcar.drive. Comment, drive is a function / method, same thing, of the car object. Redcar is an instance of the car class, and we'll cover classes in a future lesson. Function arguments, 3 forms, which can be combined. Default argument values, keyword arguments, and arbitrary argument lists, and we'll cover all those briefly in the source code. Lambda expressions, small anonymous functions that can be created with the lambda keyword. Lambda functions can be used wherever function objects are required, syntactically limited to a single expression, semantically just syntactic sugar for normal function definitions. Like nested function definitions, lambda functions can reference variables from the containing scope. And as for the source code walkthrough, here we see just the standard, here's where the interpreter is at, project name, file name, purposes, course material, and where notes would go. Alright, so for the quick review of exactly what's here, just so that if you want to read ahead, you can feel free to do that, just pause it in between whatever. Alright, so for the first one, this function does nothing. It's just, so we define it, placeholder function. Here's the parentheses and the colon, and then here's the indentation for pass. Pass is just, it doesn't really do anything. It's kind of like a no-op, and I mean, pretty much is. I don't know the internals exactly, but it's basically just a no-op. So, as no operation, just kind of makes it so that I don't get an error. So, because if I don't have this, and I try to now run the, define placeholder function, Python 3 functions, pass for, Alright, so I don't know exactly what's up with that. It's probably some really simple thing, but earlier it was returning some kind of error about here. Define test, on test. Alright, so here I expected the indentation block, so it's still kind of thinking that there's supposed to be something there or something. So that's what's up with that. So I can go ahead and delete this real fast. And you can play around with all these examples as well. So yeah, there's more options that could be done for any and all of these than what I can possibly go over in one or even a series of videos. So just mess around with it a bit and see what the results are. As for the next one, so even if I run this properly, it doesn't do anything because it's calling this function right here after we defined it, but because the only thing it has is this pass no op, it's not going to do anything, so it's not going to return anything. So comment that back out, and then here's a slightly more complicated function. Define print name times 10, and again you want to name them, same with variables, things that give some kind of idea as to what they are. Don't just name your function X or Y or something, because yeah, a lot of reasons for that. Clarity is important. So define print name 10 times 10. So here it would take name and you input. So input is kind of like, it's not really like print. Basically what it'll just do is it'll print whatever is inside of the parentheses, and it'll wait for you to type something in and hit enter, and that's what's going to get assigned to the variable that you assign it to. You can also just use it if you just want to like hold the script for some reason. You can just have it have input and then just not return to a variable, and then it's just going to sit there hanging waiting for you to click enter. So here, get name as string, and it'll print whatever we entered as name plus a little space for readability, and it'll multiply that by 10. So just order of precedence here with these two parentheses. So now with this uncommented, so we're going to call this function, and let's see what that returns. So you enter your name, enter whatever, and see if you want to count it, it'll print out times 10. So clear that out a bit, and go ahead and comment that back out. And then here we have multiply xx, xy. So here we can kind of see some of those default parameter kind of things. So x gets 1, y gets 230, and if we go right here, uncomment this function, basically it's just going to print whatever x times y is. So by default, x is going to have the value of 1, and y is going to have the value of 230. So we call this again, and it'll return 230 as expected. So we comment this back out, comment that out. And then here we have an example where we're calling it, but we're actually passing in the values. So x will become 10 and y will become 2. So we run that again and we can see 20. So 10 times 2 is 20. Everything checks out. Scroll down to these functions. Function with default arguments. We kind of already saw this earlier just now. So we define keyword def. Here's the name, default arg function. Here's x, so we're going to have to pass some value in because this one doesn't have a default value. So if we were to try to pass this one right now without passing in a value for x, it'll return default arg missing one required positional argument. Alright, so this one doesn't work. So we're going to go with this one next. And this one we're going to pass in 10, and the value is going to be 80 for y, and the lake is going to have the value of water. So we go with this, and as you can see, 10 is the value of x, 80 is the value of y, and water is still for lake. And the reason why x is 10 is because we passed in 10 here. So this value becomes that. So yeah, it's really simple, especially if you already come from a different language. But basically this x lines up with this x right here. So I'm trying to think back to when I was first learning it. It was somewhat confusing at first, but this is just kind of a placeholder variable. So this could be anything. If we just make this be that, then this one for here, this value passed in over here to reach over to this value, it would have to have the same whatever that is. So again, really simple, but for some reason I had trouble with it in the first place. So hopefully that might help somebody somehow. So we call that, go ahead and hash that out. Alright, and here we're going to have it where we're passing in a value for x, but we're also passing in a different value for y that will replace this default value of 80, and we're passing in another value to replace lake. And if we go ahead and call that, As you can see, x is 100, y is 7, and lake is grass. So that does it for default argument function kind of things. And functions with keyword arguments. Alright, so these are neat because they can just kind of be passed in whatever order. So function with keyword arguments, again we just define it, go like that. So time gets 10, weather gets sunny, print it is whatever time. This value again lines up with this value would line up with that. So just make sure the names match up. Keyword arg function, so if we call it without passing any values, it is 10 and sunny. So as you can see, the default value is 10, weather is sunny, so everything checks out there pretty simply. Alright, keyword arg function, we're going to pass in 12, and let's see what that does. It is 12 and sunny. So because we went and this is still the first value, it'll just kind of replace that, and that becomes that value. So, and then for this one, here we're going to pass in for the weather it's warm and for the time it's 1. So keywords allow us to change the positions of that we pass the values into, and it'll still match up. So the weather here is still the weather, even though it's on the left side where this would be, they'll still match up with weather over there, and same vice versa for time. So we go and we switch these over, and it is 1 and warm. So yeah, everything works there. Go ahead and play around with those a little bit. It should make pretty good sense. If you just like code around with it for 2 minutes, it's really simple. Reading it a little bit might be somewhat confusing at first, but you should be able to catch on pretty fast. Alright, so functions with arbitrary argument lists. Define arbitrary arg list function. This little pointer symbol kind of thing, maybe not that, but this little star symbol. Args, again, we could just make that be whatever we want. Stuff. Alright, so what this is going to do is whatever we pass in this case it will be cat, dog, and bird, it's just going to print whatever we get when we join all these args together. So the arbitrary arg list allows us so that anything that we add after the pretty much it'll come at the end at the end of the parameter list, if at all, and you can just enter as many arguments as you want at that point. So we're going to run it again. Name error arg's not right. Okay, so we renamed this to stuff. So let's go like that real fast. And now it should work. So you see cat, dog, bird. So we didn't have to sit here and define it as x gets cat, dog, bird, right? So, alright, cool. Everything works for that one. Hash that back out. And finally onto the lambda function. Alright, so for this one we just define make incrementer n, return lambda x plus n returns the function f. So we're going to run this function, make incrementer 42, and it's going to return the function to f. So we pass in 42 here, so the 42 is going to be there, and 42 becomes that. So it's going to be x plus 42 that we returned here, so f. And now when we run this one, we're going to print it with this. So the x value is going to become what we passed in here for the 10, which is going to become 10 plus 42. And there you can see 52. Alright, so everything works there. And finally, just one for a simple error message. File traceback. Let's see here. Alright, so traceback, most screens call last, file. Oh, real quick as far as errors, there's going to be a whole lesson on errors and exceptions and stuff later. But for right now, here's the stack traceback, most recent calls. So here's the file name. It'll tell you what line so that you can generally find where it's at. So here it says line 78, and sure enough, it's right on point for this one. A lot of times it'll be way off, but it should only be off if there's a bunch of blank space. Some other stuff can cause some kind of problems, and you sometimes have to check before or after where exactly it indicates, but it does give you a general ballpark of where to look at. So here is the line that produces the error, and then here's the error type. So lambda missing one positional argument x. So in this example you can see where, what was it? So this had to receive some value for x, but since it didn't get past it, it raised the type error. So, Alright, that does it for this lesson. Go ahead, play around with the code, and have a great day. Thank you very much.